Apples! Big, juicy apples! Well, and pears too, of course. Autumn had arrived along with heavy dews and a sea of windfall apples in my grand's orchard. I'd never really thought about it before, but there were always far more than she could find a use for herself. It seemed a shame to leave them to rot in the damp grass. On my way to the scrapyard in the old lorry, I had started to notice a property with a weighbridge about 5 miles into the journey. Over the summer it had been pretty empty, nothing really doing there. I even thought it was derelict at one point. However, over about a fortnight now, every time I had driven by, the place was alive with lorries, loaders, and blokes looking busy, not to mention huge heaps of apples in concrete bays. On my return trip one morning, having been and dumped the remains of a neighbour's Mark 1 Ford Fiesta and gaining myself £24 for the privilege, I called into the yard referred to above. A friendly looking old boy was coming out of the house, clutching an aluminium shovel and a steaming mug or something as I climbed down out of the Bedford's cab. Holding out my hand, I introduced myself. I didn't know it then, but this was a meeting that would open many doors and gave me lots of new friends, plus a few quid extra too. Neville was pretty deaf, but despite this, and advanced in years, he was still sharp as a pin. His wife, Beryl, was a distant relation on my paternal grandfather's side, as it turned out, and a very kind, warm person who welcomed me into their home. I explained why I'd called in that day, making Neville laugh like a drain when I asked what the difference was between normal pears and peri pears. Beryl quietly corrected me that they were actually known as conference pears with a gentle smile. After a very pleasant hour spent chatting in their kitchen, sat in a comfy chair next to the Arga, I drove home armed with the knowledge that apples and pears, and particularly cider apples and peri pears, were worth good money. Jam apples not so much, and conference pears less again. All were bought over the weighbridge by the ton. The following week, when things were a bit quiet in the yard, I had made a shaking pole out of an old aluminium tube with a large coat hook bolted onto the end. Heading down amongst Gran's apple trees to try it out, I was clad in my motorbike crash helmet to avoid doing an Isaac Newton. After some vigorous branch prodding, I had apples everywhere ready to pick up, plus my Gran, standing watching me and shaking her head. The problem with the fruit falling onto the grass was it slowed you right down picking it up, plus your hands got wet, cold, and stung in the damp undergrowth. I quickly sussed out the best thing was to pick up what the wind had blown down and then lay a tarp out before shaking the tree again. Much easier and quicker. From our dozen or so trees, I had just over half a ton. This I discovered when I put the lorry on Neville's weighbridge the following morning, collected me £35 for my troubles. Gran was often baffled by all the comings and goings associated with me, but it has to be said some of hers could leave you feeling somewhat perplexed too. Nick and I were sat one afternoon in the caravan watching telly whilst waiting for a customer to appear. Suddenly the set went off and the kettle died mid-boil. The cable that fed the caravan's electrics ran along behind the garden shed and up into my father's workshop. On investigation, Nick and I found my gran busy stoking a bonfire she had set right on top of the cable. This wasn't the only close shave for Gran and getting an unplanned frizzy hairstyle. A few months later, she had another go at that cable, this time finding it with a pair of shears whilst trimming some gooseberry bushes. Despite this, and various other lethal incidents in an Austin Mini Mayfair, one of which involved taking Nick and his mate home one foggy evening. Even Topsy the Yorkshire Terrier looked nervous after that one. My dear grandmother managed to make it to 82 years old, her death coming in June 2000, marking the end of having grandparents in my life. She was not the easiest person to live with, especially for my parents and aunt, but as a grandmother to me, she was always up for some fun and I have very fond memories of her. Hello! Thank you for watching my video. If you've enjoyed this and would like to see more, then please subscribe, give us a like, give us a share. You know how to do it. All the best. Cheers.